We are recording.
So I am still Jim Reed after all these 4 months. Welcome back, everybody. Nice to see you. And we have a new member of our committee who Rob is going to introduce in just a minute. And I am going to let him go right now because we do have a full agenda. I'll come back afterward to go through the agenda. But it's really great that everybody could rejoin the committee or be available as we revive and actually work toward a pretty strong deadline. So with that, Rob.
Yeah, hey, thanks everybody. Good to see you again after several months. As you may recall, we had such good momentum last spring, and we were headed towards some deliberations by you all, and hoping to get some recommendations from you by late April, early May. And then the pandemic just got the situation with the pandemic got worse and worse, and we realized that even though you were all willing to keep meeting, we weren't sure the public was paying attention, and we need the public to pay attention. So we decided to take a hiatus, and the pandemic is still here and in all of its fury. But in a way, things have also kind of, I don't know if leveled out is the right word, but I feel like we have a kind of a better handle on things. We're kind of in a groove now when it comes to adjusting our lives and things like that. I don't want to downplay what's going on with the pandemic, but the pandemic has also created an even greater sense of urgency when it comes to our financial situation. So instead of the financial lines crossing in a couple of years, the pandemic has caused the financial lines to cross right about now. And so that's moved up the urgency of this thing, of this problem that we need your help in solving. So we thought it was still important for you all to meet and help the city council work through this issue and me work through this issue in time for our budget deliberation process in the fall. So with that as kind of a backdrop, I do want to introduce Fernell. So Darlene Ademba moved to Bothell. Can you believe that? I'm just deeply offended. But Fernell is willing to step in and serve on the committee or the task force, and I really appreciate that. I know Fernell from when she taught my kids at Arrowhead Elementary School. In fact, I was so amazed. I was talking to Fernell the other day, and she said, "How's Seth doing? How's Grace doing?" I'm like, "They're in high school now. You remember my kids' names? That's awesome." She's a super dynamic teacher and great leader in the school district system, and she also has a small business. So, Fernell, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and why don't you kick off that intro session that you were just talking about?
All right. Thank you, Robin. I'm thankful for the invitation. And I always like people to know, who I am and who I'm working with. So I invite you to share a little bit of your lens to the table. And I just start by my name, Fernell. If there's other pronunciations or special meanings behind your name, I'd always like to know that, because sometimes we being a teacher and still knowing your children's names, that I work really hard on learning people's names and how they like to be addressed and called. So please tell us about that if that's for you. So my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I identify as a Black woman, and I need to say that out loud because there's those who are listening, and so I need them to know that that's part of an identity in the space that I'm speaking through. I was raised here in Kenmore near Lake Forest Park with my family and friends, my forefathers and matriarch. That's part of my identity poem I'll share later. But as Rob said, I've been an educator for 13 years. So all the staff, my colleagues and administrators are in my head and my voice. My students, I've been a coach for all of the years I've been alive. So I've got tons of students' voices in my head to bring to the table and what they need. I'm a parent. My mother's 88. She still lives in the neighborhood, so I've got a community of elderly that I bring that I can speak for. I'm also affected by how we move in this community and how I'm policed and tracked, and things that my family has been through. I am also affected by the trauma of this neighborhood, of being excluded from exclusive places, Aqua Club, the golf course, things like that. So I bring a lens for that.
Who excluded you from the golf course?
Yeah.
Remember.
Be specific.
Used to be the superintendent a long time ago when I was little, but lots of proms and events are there, and that's exclusion for lots of kids and families, and so.
Who? Stop making generalizations. Be specific.
Is that you, Lou?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
If
So,
you can accuse other people of being racist, then they should be very specific in those accusations and allegations, rather than making rash generalizations that are clearly racist on their face.
so hi Lou. I'm not sure that you heard that racist. Maybe you're hearing that in me describe my experience through the.
You said you were excluded from a golf course. I assume that was in Inglewood?
Yeah, the Inglewood course has rules that didn't allow Black families back when I was growing up.
When?
And the Aqua Club would ask for dues in advance all at once instead of monthly. And so my father had to pay all at once. And we were able to do that, but many families aren't. So I'm speaking of the experience of what many families may go through in the neighborhood here.
Actually, Inglewood was formed because
Lou,
other courses wouldn't allow other races, but we were formed so that all races and all people, we did not exclude anyone. So I think you're making a false allegation.
I could get into specifics, but I don't think that's the platform here. I'm just trying to explain.
Right. So let's get on with the economic part of it.
And we'd like to.
So I should have established a little ground. I mean, this is each person introducing themselves and talking a little bit about their perspective and their experience. So
okay, then she doesn't have to demean other people at the same time.
I didn't hear her demeaning other people. She's just talking about her own experience. And I want to give everybody else a chance to do that.
Do the same. Yeah. So I just have a different experience as you, and I'm sharing that to let you know how I've come through. So.
And that's why I asked you to be specific in your allegations. Otherwise, I perceive them as being false.
So.
Okay, well, that's your perception.
I'd rather not be in a debate right now. I'd just rather let people introduce themselves.
Let's stick to the facts then.
Well, those are my facts. So that's how I see it. And I know that you haven't had that experience. So that's why I wanted to bring that to the table. It makes a difference on how we move through the rest of this meeting and the finances and all. You're trying to have a balance tool. And that's part of the balance, is balancing those people who live here and have experiences like mine. So thank you. And I'll pass it to Jim. How about you?
Well, I was going to ask Lynn or Elizabeth or Lou, because you are committee members. So I think it's most kind of protocol, we should hear from all of you first.
Sure, I'll go. So my name is Elizabeth Spring. I lived in Kenmore now for almost 13 years, and I'm married. I have 2 children, a son and a daughter. My son will be starting middle school at Kenmore Middle this year, and then my daughter will be going into 4th grade at Kenmore Elementary. And I'm also a partner in Seaplane Kitchen and Bar. It's a restaurant that we opened a couple years ago right across from Town Square. And I wanted to be on the committee because my lens is through the restaurant business and hospitality, something a little bit unique and different that we don't have a lot of restaurants in Kenmore. So that's why I wanted to do it. And I have a business here, so I have a vested interest in not only the city succeeding, but also my own small business succeeding as well. So that's what I'm doing.
What is your business, Elizabeth? Might you mind me asking? What's your business?
It's Seaplane Kitchen and Bar.
So you are the owner. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lynn or Lou, do you want to go next?
Oh, okay.
This isn't about me. It's about sticking to the economics and solving the problems that Kenmore is facing right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lynn Swagstra. Good to meet you for now. welcome to the group. I am a new Kenmore resident. Well, actually, been here 4 years now, so it's longer than I sometimes remember. I am a longtime advocate and employee and professional in the health, wellness, and recreation industry. So I definitely look at things from a different lens than many folks. Constantly think about physical and mental health. Part of my profession is parks and recreation, but also human services. And I have dual degrees in psychology and parks and recreation administration. So I definitely look at things through kind of a social services and social science and psychology lens.
Thank you.
Also managed many budgets throughout my career, and currently, as many of the Kenmore folks know, I am the Parks and Community Services Director for the City of Kirkland. So have a lot of budget management responsibilities, and really enjoy financial management and all of the strategy and planning and problem solving that it brings.
Thank you. That's it. Now I can put face to name in the document I read. Thank you for that. I appreciate that lens too.
Thanks. Rob and Joanne, Steve, do you want to add anything about yourselves and where you're coming from?
Yeah, I'm Rob. I'm city manager for Kenmore, and I've been the city manager here for about 8 years. And before that, I was the city administrator for Gig Harbor. I don't know if you guys know that town down,
yes,
down by Tacoma, across the Narrows. But yeah, born and raised in the Tacoma area. Yeah, I love public service. I love the impact that it has on quality of life for people. You know, and it's just really fun to be part of what's been going on in Kenmore for the last quite a while now. I like to say we're on an upward trajectory of becoming, and you know, little bit by little bit, we are incrementally making Kenmore better and better, and it's just a lot of fun to be part of that.
That's interesting to know you have such a large footprint and areas. Thank you for that. I didn't know that about you. That helps. So I understand.
Joanne?
Button. Okay, so I'll go next. I'm Joanne Gregory. I've been with the city for over 13 years, and I've been in public service and finance for almost 30 years. I enjoy working in public service. I've worked for 4 different cities, but I'm also a mom, and I'm now this year a new grandmother. So that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And my children work in public service too. My daughter works for a city in Lewiston, and my son works for a city in California, and he's in law enforcement, and I think that is a lens that affects how I think.
Yes.
So,
thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Steve?
And I'm Steve Toller. I'm husband of a wife that I've been married to for 31 years, Terry, and I've known her for 48 years. We went to school with each other all that time. So anyways, and father of 2 sons, grown and live here in Eugene, Oregon, which is where I call home now. I serve as a partner with Management Partners, which is a consulting firm that consults exclusively with local government all across the United States. While I'm based here in Oregon, my clients are up and down the West Coast, from Washington and Oregon and California. I served in local government for 20 years prior to being with the firm for 5 years. Served in local government for 20 years as a IT manager and assistant city and administrative services director that oversaw HR, IT, budget, finance, telecommunications regulation, a whole bunch of different things. Finished as an assistant city manager before deciding to relocate my family up here to Oregon and joining the firm. So, and you know, let's face it, if there's a lens that I look through things on, at least when it comes to career or really more, you know, my career and this, it's the financial lens, because that's what people are expecting me to look through. But I also look through the lens of human resources and how is the organization doing, and clearly always looking through the lens of ethical perspectives, ethical
Equity.
leadership,
I appreciate
making
that.
ethics.
No wonder they fly you everywhere.
Making ethics a very important part of every decision that gets made. So.
Right. Thank
Good
you.
to meet you all.
Meet you.
Well, I'm watching the clock, so in the interest of time, I'll be real short. And I also am the least important person here as the facilitator. But I think I would say that most importantly, the lens I come through is just a deep respect for anybody, like Rob and Joanne, or for all of you on the committee, or for Steve, people who are really out in the public arena, fighting for what they believe in, trying to improve the quality of life in their communities. I love that. That's why I did work for King County for 10 years, and come September 1st this year, I'll be celebrating my 25th anniversary as a consultant.
Oh,
so
congratulations.
it's been a real privilege to be part of this group and to facilitate you. And I will say too, as part of my practice and part of my commitment to the community is conflict resolution. So I do a lot of mediation of public policy disputes and trying to bring people together and get them to be on the same page, and then actually to work together to implement the agreement.
Nice. And restorative practice too. Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. I appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
One more person, I think Tila.
Is that Tila?
Yeah, Tila's here.
Oh, I guess, okay. Hello, my name is Tila Gardner. I'm actually the permit specialist for development services, but I'm just filling in and covering some city clerk duties while that position is filled. So I would disagree with Jim. I am probably the least important person here, so I'm just going to fade into the background. You guys have a great discussion.
Oh, thank you, Tila, for your support.
Good. And just because we are running a little bit behind, how about if we do public comments first, and then we could go just to a quick review of the agenda and move into the substance of the evening. So I think, Tila, you have to control this because I see we have like 16 participants.
Yeah, so it looks like we have 7 attendees. So if anyone would like to speak during the comment portion, please raise your hand.
Yeah, let's figure out how many people would want to speak, because we might have to make some adjustments.
Yeah. So if anyone's gone to council meetings, you know how that goes. So far, no one is raising their hand. Oh, John Hendrickson has raised his hand. Looks like he's the only one.
Okay. Mr. Hendrickson, welcome again. You've been to some of our meetings when we were meeting in person, and Tila, maybe again, I should let you run this, but I just want to welcome you, Mr. Hendrickson, and give you, you've got like 3 minutes if you would take that one.
I'm going to promote him to a panelist. That's what Zoom calls it, basically allowing him to speak. So it boots him out for a second, and then it will bring him in. Okay. Let's see, Mr. Hendrickson. Okay, it looks like you're muted and your camera's off, but go ahead and turn those on, or just your voice is fine too.
Good, I'm there, thank
you. Okay, and I'm going to try something new so that you can see your time.
How many task force members are there?
It looks like we have
is it just 4?
Yeah, it is 4 out of the 6.
I thought we had 7 originally.
Well, technically it is. I'm just a little bit worried about, since we haven't heard from Anthony in a couple of months. So, but it would be 4 of 7 or 4 of 6.
Okay, thank you guys. You know, in 2 weeks you're going to have a public participation process, and when this task force first started, I asked that the task force review our original feasibility study that we had when we incorporated, which is what this task force is doing. It's kind of rewriting that feasibility study. So that study just lays out exactly the finances and the positions and duties and how we could run this city. And so far it's been ignored. And I know that there are a lot of people that are going to want to participate in a couple of weeks and want to know why that's happened, why you're not working off of the original feasibility study instead of just starting from scratch and just creating your own. So if you go back to the meeting, I think it was in March, there were 2 major issues there that I think needed to be addressed that weren't. And Steve Toller was working with the group, and he was looking at revenue and expenses and getting to the point where you're matching up. and he was saying, he said several times, 3 or 4 times, you got to remember, once we do all this with revenue expense, we have to determine if it's feasible. And that's, if it's feasible, he said it 3 or 4 times. And yet we had a feasibility study that has been ignored. And the second issue there is that the feasibility study in the executive summary said, the key is you have to limit your personnel. And it was around 13 to 16 people, and you had to work as a contract city. And we have like around 50 or more employees now, and the task force, the leadership, it never addressed the number of employees and how we were told in the beginning we could never afford all these people. So it's a huge omission, and it really needs to be addressed. And another question in here is, why is the public better served with this task force rather than the city council running these meetings with the public all this time, since they have all the experience, especially a bunch of them that have been there for years, and the insight to have an informative conversation with the public rather than people trying to learn. And here we have one new, with Fernell being new, and I welcome her. I know her from the community club, has great energy, but I hope, you know, she hasn't been here, and 3 of the other people aren't even showing up. So one thing that the city council is responsible for doing, I'll read it from RCW 35A 13090. Upon its own action, the council may create such departments, offices, and employments as it may find necessary or advisable, and may determine the powers and duties of each department or office. So that means the city council is responsible for creating positions and the duties in those positions.
So that's 3 minutes, Jim. I don't know if
So I was just going to let him finish his sentence,
okay.
but that is the 3 minutes.
So the council is responsible for creating the positions and the duties in those positions. The city manager is responsible for hiring the people and making sure they carry out those duties. The city council, I was on for 8 years on the council, they've never done it. They need to do it. We really need to look at how many people we're hiring, what their duties are, how much we're paying. We have some of the highest paid people in the state here, and 50 people when we should have 13 to 16 people. That's the issue that needs to be addressed, and I hope you will recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Okay, Rob, do you want to do at this point, like it's 6:54, do you want to do a little recap of the process today just to refresh people's memories, or do we want to skip that? Do you think it's necessary?
I can, but is there anybody else that wants to comment? Any other hands raised?
Oh, thank you.
No, there are no hands raised.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
Sorry.
for people who might be just listening, welcome.
I'm just trying to text one of the task force members to see if he can make it. 1 second here. All right. So process to date. All right. So this is this issue has been raised by me and the finance director to the city council for quite some time now. We've been bringing it up at the city council's retreats, and at the January retreat, they made it actually the January of last year retreat, they made it a priority. And so we went through a process and asked the council to kind of create a path forward for creating a financial sustainability plan. And part of this was to have this task force be created as another perspective and as a community lens through which to look through all this. And so the council directed us to get that task force going, and we got you going right after the beginning of the year. And the first part of the task force meetings, the initial meetings, was about defining the problem. And so that's where Steve Toller came in. We hired Steve Toller to provide an independent look at our budget to see if he saw the same thing we did, and causes and effects, and And so he did his own independent analysis of our budget situation, and he came to similar conclusions that our cost of providing services is going up faster than our revenues are. And he met with you all, or the task force, at the beginning of the year to show why that is and how the numbers are shaking out and how they're predicted to shake out over the next few years. And at that time, the prediction was that the financial lines, the revenues expenditure lines, were going to cross in, I believe it was 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And so we also gave the committee a rundown of city operations, who does what, and where does the money come from? What are their main sources of revenues and expenditures and things like that. So we did that in the first few meetings. And then we were about to have you all start deliberating, and we're also about to get Steve Toller's recommendations. And then we decided to put the brakes on it, given how our public was had their attention focused elsewhere, correctly so. But like I said at the beginning, we think that we need to get going on this again. And it actually gave Steve additional time to formulate some recommendations and on how to prevent the lines from crossing. And so that's where we are tonight. We're coming forward with Steve Toller's recommendations. So one thing to note is Steve Toller, his report is his independent report and his recommendations. Of course, he and I have discussed them and I've seen them, but they're not necessarily my recommendations, they're his recommendations. So there's some things you may see in there that I may or may not recommend to the City Council. So I just want you to be aware of that. And welcome, Jeff Pooley.
Yes.
My text worked.
I was all set to join at 7 because when the initial email came out saying it was on August 11, I set it at 7, and then I forgot to go back and change it when the time was actually updated. So my apologies. I'm glad I made it.
Welcome, Jeff. So now we have 5 of our task force members.
Good to see you. And Jeff, we just introduced a new task force member, Fernell Miller. Darlene Ademba moved to Bothell, and so I asked Fernell to take her place. And Fernell is very much a part of the community, born and raised here in Kenmore. Ever since she was a elementary school student, is that right? Yeah. So I'll let you fill in the blanks if you want, Fernell. You're muted.
Well, we'll catch up. Oops. Yeah, we'll catch up a little later. It's nice to meet you, Jeff, and we'll have some time on the other side. I'm introducing another tool, so I'll tell more about it then too. So thank you.
Okay.
Good, thank you, Rob. Okay, I'm just going to do a real quick overview of the agenda. So Rob has mentioned, and we've heard other mentions tonight about the public and the need for community engagement in this process. So in a minute, you're going to hear from Joanne about the balancing tool, which has gone online today and is going to be the means by which we gather public input into all of the issues you're talking about. And the first kind of preliminary or interim report of the public's sentiments will be delivered to you on the 24th, so you'll have the benefit of that. So Joanne's gonna review that in just a minute. And if you have the agenda in front of you, then you're gonna see that we're gonna go on to Steve, who has provided us with a very comprehensive set of recommendations and a fuller, more detailed report. I hope you all had a chance to take a look at it. He's got a PowerPoint that will walk us through it. And after that, Steve, I'm gonna have to look to you a little bit in terms of at what points might you be interrupted to allow for some questions or reactions, but when we get to the end, we'll allow time for people to ask questions of Steve. And then we'll just take a little bit of time to talk kind of on a preliminary basis about the task force's recommendations. And so then you've got a couple other documents through me, you received from Fernell this social and equity lens, and we're going to talk a little bit about how that might apply. And then I also sent you a document that was just excerpts of previous meetings, we had started to kind of just very gingerly come up with some ideas. And so that's another reference for you. But the bulk of our meeting tonight is to really hear from Steve, about his recommendations, and to give you a chance to ask him any questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it to you, Joanne, so we can go through the balancing tool.
Okay. I will make this as brief as I can, but hopefully give you a good idea of how it was built and how it can be used without, we're not going to go through a problem solving exercise tonight. Everyone can do that on their own. But this is what I think is a really cool tool to start to get public input and engagement. And when we met last spring, I tried to show you a demo of it online, and our resolutions and all were really out of whack, and it didn't go over very well, but I'm going to show it to you again tonight. But I hope that we'll be able to incorporate it into our financial sustainability process and receive some good input and ideas from the people who participate in the community. It's an online budget simulation tool. It's colorful and visually appealing, very easy to use, and gives participants an opportunity to give real feedback to the decision makers, so they can, the participants can sort of understand some of the decisions that these leaders need to make and how tough some of those decisions are and some of the trade-offs that have to come about. So I built a simulation on the 2021-2022 budget projections that correlate with Management Partners' diagnostic tool, which underlies the fiscal sustainability plan that Steve is going to present to you shortly. So I wanted to make sure that the two correlated. We're working with the same universe of numbers and balances. So the projected deficit in his report for the next 2 years, which happens to be our upcoming budget period, in a post-pandemic setting is a $973,000 deficit. So that's the problem that has been built into the Balancing Act simulation. And then it incorporates some, but not all, of revenue and expenditure strategies that Management Partners offers in their report, as well as a few what ifs and scenarios that Rob and I also wanted to include for feedback. So I'm going to share my screen, show you where the tool is accessed, and briefly how it works. And I'm going to do that now. I didn't have an opportunity to practice this ahead of time, but you should, I hope, see a web page, the fiscal sustainability web page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I don't. But as long as you do. So on this financial sustainability webpage, which is a piece of the city's website, there is a Balancing Act budget simulator. Do you see where my mouse is? I'm circling it.
Yeah.
Everybody see that? I do, so I hope everybody else does.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So this is where one can go to open up the simulator. So I'm going to click on that now, and it will take you to the Balancing Act tool in a moment. I hope I'm able to see this because okay. Well, I've been in and out of it, you can imagine, multiple times. So I'm just going to start over. It says I have a previously saved session. So when you click on that, and I have to point out, and I think I should add this to the web page, that it does not work well in Internet Explorer. It works best in Chrome or Edge or Firefox. So I'm going to make a note to remind people about that. So when you click in, it welcomes you to the Balancing Act and gives you some information about the what and why and how we're doing this. And then you can continue on to the next page. And it asks one question that a participant can answer about their satisfaction with the level of services, and then the postal code of where that person lives. And then you can just continue on. And here's the tool itself. And it's not multiple pages, it's just one page display. So it's not very complicated, and I hope it's intuitive, but if it's not, and you're not a person to kind of click around, just like see what it does, you can go up to help, and it will tell you how you can manipulate the budget. But what it's first showing you right off the bat is that in our 2021-22 projection, we are in a deficit. We are starting with a deficit of $973,000 basically. And our job is to balance that and bring it to zero. So that's why the bar is red. And in the upper section of the tool is all of the spending data, and down below is the revenue data. So starting with the spending, I broke it down into just 3 really large categories, but you can open these up and find out more about them. And there's a little button that is more information. So if you look at general government, it will tell you what costs are rolled up into general government and what costs are rolled up into police services and how that works. And the same thing with public works. And all of those buckets of spending totals almost $27 million. So you can explore general government by clicking on that, stop, going up and down here, little button to the right. And then it expands to show you some subcategories that roll up to general government. And this is where participants can get in and increase or decrease or accept or reject certain budget options. So for instance, the first couple, like wages and benefits, you can click here and say, well, what's in there? And it tells you how many employees are supported in the city with wages and benefits. But the number is locked because it just doesn't make sense to increase it or decrease it by, ad hoc or just random numbers. But if you have thoughts about wages and benefits, you can still add a comment about it. You might think, we have too many employees or our salaries are too high, but rather than manipulating the wage and benefit number, you can write your comments in here and they'll be saved. And I know that's a big number, and I forgot to say, remember this is 2 years, a 2-year budget. So all these numbers represent 2 years worth of spending. Some of the choices that you can manipulate, there are 2 ways that a person can. And so here's a real number, contribution to human services, which was built into our budget in 19 and 20. And this was the budget amount. You can increase it if you think that we should contribute more by clicking the plus button. And it increases in increments of 1%. And you can see over here to the right, the number going up and adding to the budget, and you can also see the deficit going up at the same time. If you think, no, that's not something I want to increase, in fact, I want to decrease it, you can do that as well. And then that brings the deficit down. So that type of opportunity is available to manipulate a couple of these categories. So we've created things that we think are important to the city. Some, like I said, some are in the plan, some are not, but some are, they're all real issues that we deal with and try to understand how we can incorporate them or not into our budget. Another way you can do this is like with the climate change initiatives that have been a huge topic of conversation lately. It's not currently in this budget scenario, but maybe it should be. So you're asked a question, should we add an additional employee and other resources to create and implement a climate action plan? And we feel that that would probably cost over the course of 2 years about $220,000 to fund a new employee and the resources that go with it. So if you click yes, we should do this, it would probably add about $220,000 to the budget. And again, it affects your deficit. If you say no, it's fine the way it is. We don't need to add anything to it at this time. No change. Or if you want to have a comment, say maybe we don't need a full-time person, but we should explore other avenues to participate in a climate change program, you can make comments here. There's also a share button. So if you make a decision about any of these categories or subcategories and you want to share them out to someone else, you've got their email, you can do that as well with this share button. So I've laid out a number of scenarios that people can respond to, not only in general government, but in police services and some in public works. So these are available for everybody to kind of read at their leisure and go through this exercise. And the same method applies to revenue. So for instance, in taxes, there are quite a number of scenarios that a person could consider. Using our bank capacity for property tax, adding additional sales tax for transportation funding. There's utility taxes, admissions, B&O taxes. Fees and intergovernmental are pretty much fixed. It's not an easy what if to present to the public, so I didn't create any of those, but you can still add comments to them. And then in other, there is another scenario that folks can consider that involves traffic photo enforcement. So the challenge is to figure out what's important to you, manipulate this tool to represent the priorities that you have for the city, and figure out how they are going to be funded so that in the end you come up with a balanced budget. Behind all of this, the data is being collected, and as we get closer to the 24th meeting, I'll be able to share with you a recap of all the comments, all the solutions that have been presented, and as a person exits out or submits their choices, there's a couple of exit questions such as, do you live in Kenmore? There's a drop-down choice for age ranges, gender, zip codes, and folks can answer them or not. And then there's some additional information down here at the bottom where people can link to our financial sustainability plan page. There's a link to our 2019-2020 adopted budget. And that is the budget simulation tool, and it is live now. Tomorrow in our e-news, it's going to be promoted with the link as well as on social media. So I'm really hoping that the word will get out to the community to give this tool a try. I think.
Hey, Joanne,
yep.
Can I jump in? Can you go back up to expenditures?
Of course.
So the city, we have close to 200 different programs that we offer, whether they're internal services programs or outward facing programs. It's close to 200 programs. We don't have all 200 programs up for grabs here in the spending thing. We put the ones that are more discretionary. For example, in this, I'm not giving the public the opportunity to cut Joanne's budget. In my opinion, she has a pretty lean department for finance, HR, accounting, and payroll, and all those things. And so I'm not giving the public the opportunity to cut Joanne's department, for example, or the permitting department. I feel like we're pretty adequately staffed to handle the level of permits that we are generating, and those also generate corresponding revenue to go with them. So it's things like that we're not putting in the balancing act, but we are putting things up that are more discretionary, if that makes sense.
But even so, there's still an opportunity for folks to comment about my budget or my position if they so choose.
Yeah.
I'm clicking around while I found it and was clicking around myself. This seems like an appropriate level of it's not too detailed to be overwhelming. It shows where the big dollars are going. It gives opportunities to yes, no. I was a little bit worried given how much is going on in the city budget that this would be overwhelming, but I think that this hits the high points and does a good job.
Good. Who was that that spoke?
This is Jeff.
Oh, okay. Well, and I wanted it to be easily recognizable. When you see Steve's financial forecast, you're going to see that these numbers came from that. And then in some cases, I broke them down a little bit further based on, more discrete programs that Rob mentioned. But you don't want it to be too busy and too overwhelming. So for those
reactions or questions?
Any hands? Because I'd like to make a comment.
Go ahead. I'm not seeing any.
I know that the task force has, has received some materials that show how other cities have used this tool, especially most recently, the city of Tacoma had a large public meeting that incorporated this balancing act tool in their budget deliberations just fairly recently when they're looking at a $67 million deficit. City of Airway Heights in Washington is another one. And so these are other cities you can Google to see how they have used it. The city of Norfolk, Phoenix, Denver, many more, but those are just some to name a few if anyone in the audience is interested in exploring how other cities have used this tool. Just wanted to put that out there in case someone wants to, do a little bit more research on it.
And as Joanne said, we will have information for you in 2 weeks when we next meet. So you'll see some of the responses and preferences that the public has been expressing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now I need to unshare my screen?
Yes.
Oh dear. How does that happen?
Joanne, would you be able to mention how we are informing the community that this is available to them and that we're actively seeking input?
We had a press release went out last week, I believe, Rob, did it not, that mentioned the Financial Sustainability Task Force gearing up again, and that there was a balancing act tool that would be available on the website. Tomorrow in our e-news that our communications team is putting out, there's going to be a mention of it and a encouragement to use it. And I believe they're going to put it on Facebook. I hope on Instagram. Do we do Twitter as well? So yeah. I think they were waiting for it to go live tonight. I didn't want it to go live in advance of you folks seeing it and walking through it with you, but it is live now. And so we're going to start heavily promoting it.
And last but not least, a postcard is going to be mailed, hard copy postcard.
I forgot about the postcard.
Yeah, it's going to hit mailboxes tomorrow or Thursday. So it's it also we want to be aware or mindful of folks that don't have good internet access or access to a computer. So on the postcard, it's going to say if you don't have good internet access or access to a computer, you can make an appointment to come to City Hall and use the balancing act tool.
Right, we're going to have a computer or a kiosk in the lobby where people can go on the tool, log in, and go walk through it next week.
Thank you.
Did I successfully stop sharing my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And so the deadline for this tool is August 24th at noon. And why August 24th at noon? Because that's the night you all meet. And it's also when we have the open house with the public right before you all meet. And so we want to have all that data gathered in time for you to look at that night.
One question on the social media sharing of this. So I've seen the posts on like the Instagram and Twitter and Facebook of the announcements. But I don't see a lot of engagement on the city's official accounts, but I do see a ton of engagement on like the private Kenmore Neighbors Facebook group, the Next Door groups and those kinds of things. There's a lot of engagement there. Do you plan on sharing in those groups, or is there like a policy against sharing? Because I don't see the city like posting kind of official stuff through those channels too much.
I'll let you take that, Rob, because I don't do any of the social media for the city.
Yeah, I know we can always count on the administrator of the Kenmore Neighbors to share the city's link, the city's post onto the private group. And if they don't, we can ask them to.
Okay.
Any other questions? Oh, Joanne?
I'm sorry, and I don't mean to raise this at the last minute, Rob, but I was just thinking about the timing of this. One of the things, I know the task force needs the data to deliberate going forward, but is it possible that in that public meeting that we have before the task force meeting, we could have a meeting using this tool live? It provides instant feedback.
You mean incorporated into the open house, or? I guess, yeah. We don't want to crowd out time for people to actually give comments and things
True.
like that.
I know, and it could be very busy, but there is a meeting mode version of this where people at home could either be on their tablet or on their phone, do their thing, make their choices, and it is collected in a presenter mode where then I could immediately show how many people made this choice, how many people manipulated, this particular budget, and so there would be instant feedback during that meeting. But I just wonder if it would take too much time, but it would be kind of fun.
I don't know if you could do it both in parallel. We can seek, public interaction and comments while at the same time they're doing the tool. I don't know. Let's talk about it a little more.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to practice it with the staff on Monday.
Oh, okay.
Joanne, this is Lou. I have one question regarding this tool. Do you really think it'd be useful to have public input when they have not been exposed to all of the various budget items that you and Rob have explained to us over the other task force meetings, and our understanding of how the priorities of each of those items affects Kenmore, and how sensitive they are to being reduced or increased. You know the priorities, you know how important they are and whether or not they should be changed, but I'm not sure if even our task force members, and certainly not most of the general public beyond maybe John Hendrickson, are capable of reliably providing usable information on this tool. As amazing as the tool is, do you really think any of this outside input is going to be that useful to you and Rob?
I think it has the potential to be useful. And I think the biggest benefit, though, is to make the community feel that they are participating. And I don't feel that's something we've done well in the past. And maybe this is a slow start, and maybe the beginning of more education to come in the future. But I would like to have more input from the community, from more of the community, and I'm trying to create an opportunity for people to do that, whether those are really well-informed decisions or not. But I'd like to know what people think and what people value and what people are willing to to pay for.
Right, Lou makes a good point, and I've been thinking about that as well. So, for example, on the Balancing Act tool, there's a plus minus symbol next to the police contract, and so any member of the public could click on the minus tool until you balance the budget. But what is that? What is reducing police by, I don't know, $500,000 do? That's not the member of the public that's reducing the police budget by $500,000 doesn't necessarily know the implications of that. Mm-hmm. So I think it is important to view it through that perspective. For me, the Balancing Act tool is more useful as kind of a general preferences sense from the community. So let's say it's not like we're going to have data that comes out that says X% of the people that responded to this cut human services by X dollars. But what might be more valuable is to say, yeah, there was a general trend. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but there was a general trend to cut human services, you know, or to increase human services, whatever the case may arrive at. But so for me, it's a tool of just kind of sensing general preferences of the public, not like scientific, oh, you know, X% of the public cut the police budget by this much money. Also, we have to remember that this is definitely not scientific or statistically valid. It's a self-selected tool. So, Lou, you make a really good point. It's not something that we can say, oh, we must go with what the public said in the Balancing Act because they overwhelmingly said this. It's just a really good reference point, right, in a general sort of way.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions, observations?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for doing this. I know budgets can be extremely complex and sometimes very difficult to understand the nuances and the ramifications of some of the decisions. But I do think that Washington is a state that really supports community engagement and community feedback. And this is about as straightforward and easy and user-friendly a way as you can use to get community feedback. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay. It's 7:28 and we're running considerably behind. I think I'm just going to give everybody a heads up that we had allocated about 55 minutes for Steve to work with you tonight. So we may not have a lot of time at the end for the task force to start expressing preferences, but I think those will come out even in your reactions to what Steve is presenting and in questions you ask him. But at the very least, before we adjourn tonight, I do want to give again Fernell the opportunity to talk a little bit about how we might apply the equity and social justice tool too. So Steve, at this point, I want to welcome you, and I'm going to kind of just take the lead from you in terms of like at times where you might want to have questions or reactions, or maybe you want to let people raise their hand at any time. But welcome and thank you, and for all the extensive report that you sent everybody. And again, it was sent a week early, so I do hope people had a chance to look at it.
Did we want to give Fernell a moment now, or were you thinking later, Jim?
I was going to do it right as we move from Steve's report into like the task force and its work, but it doesn't make any difference to me. If you think that this would be a little bit more appropriate to add it right now, let's do that.
Fernell, what were you thinking? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. I have some thoughts on that. I'd like to listen a little bit more and then bring that in before we move in.
Okay. Yeah, and
that's okay.
yeah, when I was talking to Fernell, and I was trying to bring Fernell up to speed as much as I could, and I had a meeting with her, and Fernell's also met with Jim too, just to try to give her as much information as we can leading up to tonight. Fernell mentioned this tool that's used at the Shoreline School District. I looked it up, and it's, as far as equity tools out there, this one to me is the most straightforward and no nonsense one. So I like this tool, and but let's go ahead and hear from Steve, and then Fernell can walk us through the tool.
I just want to say everyone did get it, so that was part of our packet, the meeting materials. So okay. So Steve, you're on.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. I thought you were going to say, Jim, Steve, if you can get this done in 10 minutes, great. Let's go for that.
It's too important.
Yeah, well, okay. So thanks, everyone. It's good to see you again, and be with you again, even if it's in this interesting environment that we're in right now. So I'm going to make a little bit of an assumption that most of you have had an opportunity to review our report thus far. And so I'm going to push through quite a bit of this. I understand that there might be some public members that are viewing this, and maybe they've had an opportunity to see it. But what I wanted to do is just, kind of turn back the clock a little bit, remember where we were in terms of the discussion that we had back in April as we saw this recession starting to come on and what the potential impacts could be. We've had an opportunity to refine that forecast, and it's led to kind of understanding what the magnitude of the problem is so that we could identify the appropriate solutions that would meet that timeline. We'll talk a little bit as well about the steps that the city has already taken to address the pandemic, and that feeds into this. And then clearly what we'll be doing is we'll be sharing with you, the next steps towards completion of the fiscal sustainability plan, but really what we're going to be sharing with you is really the budget scenarios and strategies that we've put together that will help you, understand what your next steps are towards, completion of the FSP from your perspective. And thank you, Rob, for mentioning my name quite a bit in terms of Steve's recommendation, but please understand that this is the recommendations of our firm management partners and the host of folks that we've had that have been working on this. A lot of the strategies that we've identified have come around as a result of the years of experience that we have in working with local governments up and down the West Coast, and completely understanding what the unique situations are in Washington State and understanding Washington State finance. So let's step back a little bit. Let's remember what the city's existing kind of fiscal situation was, and what was originally expected. And this graph is kind of what Rob was alluding to, in that the left side here is showing you what the projected net annual surplus or deficit is. Surplus, of course, meaning above the line and above zero, where revenues are greater than expenses and transfers to other funds. And in 2018, the city had finished with a surplus, about 1.23 million. And in 2019, ended up having a deficit spending of 920,000, but 620 of that was a conscious effort to try to seed some money over into basically the pavement preservation fund. Otherwise, the city was looking at break even for the next 2 years, and as Robert indicated, starting in 2022 is where the lines would cross, where revenues would not keep pace with expenditures, and therefore that was expected to grow long term. And as you will recall, one of the city's largest revenue sources is property taxes, and that by state statute has a limitation of potential of 1% growth through council action if they choose to take that action, and that's based on an entire levy of total property taxes that are levied, and then it's apportioned out at the assessor's office level to each individual property owner based on the assessed valuation of their property. But that can only be done as a 1% as a council resolution, if you will, council action. To do anything more than that requires a vote. So that's the largest revenue source, followed by sales tax, and then a few other intergovernmental and service fees. But that increase of 1% of that revenue source doesn't equate with the expected growth of 2%, 3%, 4% in terms of the cost of doing business, whether it's the sheriff's contract for law enforcement services at existing levels and existing services, and also cost of or inflation for compensation and benefits, et cetera. And so that's why that structural gap is there, and that's why it grows. And if unabated, and if no corrective action were taken, the city would draw down its reserves, which started at about just about $4.5 million, down to about $3.5 million after the transfer to the pavement preservation fund was done, and would ultimately then start going down towards zero and would fall below zero in 2026, again, if no corrective action were taken.
Steve, can I jump in real quick? Can you go back to that previous slide? And in 2019, it was not only money we sent over to pavement preservation, but we also put, I believe, about 600,000 or so into our savings account, which is separate from the general fund. So that's another reason why we're showing a deficit. We're actually putting money into our savings account, or what we call the Strategic Opportunities Fund.
Right, and those reserves are not incorporated in terms of available for general fund use. Those are expected to be used. Now, could they be used? They could be used on a one-time basis, but that's not the expected use of those by council policy. To make things worse is that, based on a pavement management study, as you might recall, the city was looking to have to really invest an additional about $1.5 million annually to maintain the current pavement condition index level of where your streets are right now. In addition to that, the city is also, and all cities are losing what are called CAB fees, Transportation Benefit District funding, of about $350,000 a year for Kenmore. So that would have depleted reserves by 2022 even faster if you assume that those street fund costs are covered by the general fund, because frankly no other funds really exist based on what the city is currently investing in its road infrastructure to maintain that pavement index up to the level that it currently is in. That was before the forecast, but also it's important to understand where Kenmore is in relation to other cities. And what we did is we did some comparative research. You saw it in the report, and this graph is basically tells, I think, part of the story of what's going on with respect to Kenmore's availability to provide services at the same level that other cities are doing. And as you see here, these other cities on a per capita basis. So when you look at the total general fund revenues that each city is bringing in, and you divide that by the number of people that live in the community, the average is around $870 a year per person. In Kenmore's case, close to the bottom, only lower is Mill Creek. It's about $560. And so that ends up being about 55%. The average is 55% higher than your per capita revenues. And so when it comes to evaluating different opportunities, the question then becomes, does the city need to right size itself and reduce its service levels, understanding that it's not going to be able to provide services like are provided in other communities? Or does it need to do something with respect to its revenue side to be able to assist that? So there's, and everybody has a different approach in terms of where they come with that, but just know that these other cities to which Kenmore reasonably compares itself based on the geographic location and in many cases the relative size, it's lower than other agencies. Well, enter the COVID-19 pandemic. Boy, this blow up really is a little too larger than life, actually. In fact, this whole pandemic is somewhat larger than life. And as the recession was starting to take place, staff realized that this was going to be a problem, that there was going to be definite hits to its sales tax and to its other revenue sources. And so the city started to take action on that over the last few months. And the city came up with about $1.1 million of net reductions for the current fiscal year that we're in. And they ranged in terms of reducing street maintenance costs to consulting costs, district court services, and all the other things that you see in these bullet points here. Now, about 300,000 of those annually were expected to continue, and so we've built that into the revised forecast. So we've incorporated the $1.1 million in 2020, and then a $300,000 reduction in expenditures starting in 21 throughout the rest then of the forecast range, to just understand what that looks like. And on the left side, you see what the amounts were on a departmental level out of the general fund that were reduced. And again, this 1.1 is reductions in the general fund. It's not any other funds, it's the general fund. And so you see, again, the lion's share of this, about 430,000, was reductions in the street maintenance funding area that goes to the streets fund, but it's funded by the general fund to the extent that the streets fund revenues is not sufficient. And that's basically what happened here, is that the city made a decision on a one-time basis to reduce that. Well, what does the updated kind of forecast really rely upon? It relies on a series of assumptions, and one of the one of the key assumptions is how long is this recession going to last? And as we look at what the state of Washington and the state's Economic and Revenue Forecast Council has looked at in terms of what the impacts are in the state, it's pretty staggering. I mean, employment levels have fallen nearly 15% from what the state was originally assuming, and they are expecting that employment to stay well below what their expectations were, that have a significant impact in terms of income tax and other areas, and also disposable income for folks. And so that's going to have a prolonged impact, that it's going to stay below the line well into 2025. Personal income is also expected to drop about 10%. This chart kind of almost, hides it in terms of the difference between the green line, which is the June updated forecast, versus the blue, which was the February forecast. But when you look at the details of what has fallen here, the state is assuming that personal income is going to drop about 10% below what the expectations were starting in 2021, and it continues to get exacerbated through 2025. And finally, housing permits, which is a good sign in terms of what's going on in the residential real estate market, in terms of development and what developers are seeing. The expectations there have plummeted significantly. The number of housing permits that are expected to be drawn is, 4,500 units, less than what it was expected to be when they had done the forecast pre-COVID. What does all that mean? It means that there's going to be a prolonged recession, and we believe that as well. We believe it's going to take 3 to 4 years to just try to catch up to where we were before that economic freight train that we were all on stopped. The revenue losses for Kenmore are going to approach about $3.4 million through 2024 compared to what was originally expected. In fact, sales tax losses itself is expected to be about 25% in 2020. Thank goodness for the Wayfair decision that was reached, and some of you may recall this conversation a while ago, but the essence of that Wayfair decision was that it changed the way where the point of sale is, to put it in very simple terms, for a sales tax generated sale. And so the likes of Wayfair, which you all know as an online reseller, the impacts of that helped in terms of the citing of where online revenues are coming from. And so Kenmore is seeing an uptick in sales. So that's great. But all that said, and even though, with the stay-home orders that were in effect, the sales tax losses for 2020 are projected to be 25%. And that's going to take quite a while to be able to recover. And so when we look at what the revised forecast means for Kenmore, is that in 2020, you might just end up right at around break even, but starting, especially as a result of the $1.1 million of reductions that the staff has recommended and council blessed in terms of trying to right the fiscal ship in 2020. But ongoing, it's going to be a significant structural gap that starts at about 600,000 and grows up to about 1.8 million, which was similar to what it was going to grow up to before. But the problem is that we've lost $3.4 million of revenue during the phase of around 21 to 24, 25 timeframe. And what does that mean in terms of reserves? It means that reserves will hit zero, if not corrected, by 2025, and would fall below that then after that point. And what this all means, basically, it's going to require about $750,000 in annual budget strategies just to be able to correct the action that's going on here, not later than 2022, but would have to grow up to about 1.8 million, clearly by the time that we hit this out year here, where we're seeing a $1.8 million gap. Well, the longer you wait, the greater the impact is, and the greater the amount of budget solutions that will be required in future years. And so as we understood that to be then what the new expectations are based on the recessionary forecast and the drop that we're expecting in sales tax revenues and some of the other revenue sources that we see, the sales tax is by and far the largest. that informed our strategies analysis and informed the scenarios that we ended up developing for the city's consideration. Let me just give you a reminder. We talked about this before, that fiscal sustainability planning is really this concept of being able to create sustainable set of fiscal policies and action steps to provide the services that are expected by the community without the potential of creating insolvency situation for the city and making sure that it can meet all of its obligations. And so it really is incumbent upon the city to look at that in the way that we've done it, and really is 4 categories. Those that try to maintain service levels that include expenditure controls and cost shifts, service delivery alternatives, and revenue enhancements. And to the extent that the sum of those 3 are not able to achieve the fiscal sustainability that's needed in solving a structural gap that exists that I showed you on the previous charts, then you'll have to look at service reductions. And some examples of that is, just on the expenditure controls and cost shift side, what are the ways that the city can control its growth of expenditures? Some cities will look at implementing a wage freeze that will limit the growth of personnel costs, and that's one option. Or the city can also look at shifting costs to other viable sources. If there were other revenue sources that were available, some cities will have some other revenue sources that will help pay for things, like if they were doing economic development, a transient occupancy tax could help with, tourism and travel costs that the city might otherwise be doing. Those would be examples of being able to shift costs to other viable sources. Service delivery alternatives are really looking at opportunities to either share services with other agencies or public-private partnerships, contracting out services to the extent that they can be done on a more cost-effective manner, or insourcing services if the city had excess capacity in a certain area and could help monetize that by charging fees for another agency and providing services for them. Revenue enhancements, there's 3 ways to do that. You either increase the base through things like economic development or other examples to increase the base of revenues that would be available. You increase the rate, and that could be either in the form of a tax rate or fees, or the third is adding new sources, new taxes and new fees that are not currently done. And again, the sum of those 3 are trying to maintain service levels to the fullest extent possible. It doesn't keep service levels at the same as they are, but it's trying to maintain them to the fullest extent and still achieving the outcomes that are expected by the community. And to the extent that those aren't able to do that, you have to look at service level reductions, which typically come in the form of workforce reductions, because for most cities' cases, 70 to 80% of the general fund is provided by people. And if it's not people that they employ, it's through a contract that employs people, such as the contract that you have with King County Sheriff's Office to provide law enforcement services to the community. Or you have to look at reducing program availability or even eliminating programs, if necessary. We also used kind of a quadratic or quadrant analysis to really evaluate strategies, and it was based in 2 areas. The first is using factors that would consider what is the difficulty of implementing, and the factors that we used ranged from potential community pushback of either eliminating a service or implementing a new revenue source. What are the technical and operational difficulties for the agency, for the city to implement that? Does the timing work? If it's a great idea in all the other capacities, but it's going to take 8 years to implement it, okay, does that really solve the issue that you have today? That had to be taken into consideration, as well as the disruptive impact that it has on either existing service delivery or disruptive impact within the city organization itself, which had to be a consideration. And then we take that and compare that then in terms of the difficulty of implementation with the fiscal impact. And based on the $1.8 million structural gap that's growing to by 2027, and the need to be able to solve that gap, we made an assessment and a judgment in terms of a fiscal impact of more than $100,000 for any one strategy would have high impact. But something that's less than 50,000, it would take a lot of those to get up to the 1.8 million that we're looking at. And so we had, received input and came up with over 50 strategies, frankly, that we identified, but some were like 5,000 here, 7,000 here. We had to focus on what the areas that were going to provide the greatest fiscal impact and have the highest potential to provide fiscal sustainability for the community in terms of, the success of implementing it. And so we had to focus on those items that had a little bit higher price tag. So we focused on items that were mostly over about $50,000 or over, because otherwise, the potential for it to really drive sustainability might be slim and none. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't those strategies that the city could still look at implementing, but when it came to our analysis and what was really going to provide sustainability and the timing that you needed, we had to look at those that were going to provide some level of significance. And so we came up with about 22, I'd say actually 21 plus different strategies for the city to consider. In the area of expenditure controls and cost shifts, it ranged from school resource officer and eliminating that program, or the city's funding at least of that SRO. Shifting the cost of ball fields and park lease at Bastyr University. Did I say that right, Rob? Bastyr?
Bastyr, yeah.
Bastyr, good, okay, good. Which currently is costing the city about $50,000, and that would be a cost shift to those that use those fields through a fee or a service. And then finally is looking at the city's existing cost allocation plan of the costs that it's incurring in its administrative divisions, and how are those costs being allocated to other funds that rightly so are tapping into Rob and Joanne's and other, city attorney and other people's times, and really revisiting that cost allocation plan. Service delivery changes. They ranged from looking at a different way of handling the maintenance costs for Log Boom and Squires Landing waterfront parks that could shift some of those costs perhaps, and or look to really work with a third party. Maybe it's maybe it's somebody that's concessionaire or using those parks that would be able to monetize those parks and then allow the city to transfer that responsibility over to those providers. So that was that item. The city's organizational structure was looking at the city's overall organizational structure and identifying solutions that could end up changing or reducing the way that programs were being provided, ultimately by shifting some resources and positions around, and perhaps allowing for an elimination of a position or two to be able to get to that point. Jail provider alternative, that's something that would take a long time to implement, but it was something that we estimated would have an impact of about $50,000 or more on an ongoing basis, especially in light of some of the increases that city has seen, but that could be a long time in coming, and that's why it's got a low potential of success. Fleet maintenance services, this is one exception where we identified it originally. It ended up going down to about 20,000 by the time we were done. We left it on here for conversation point in terms of what the potential could be, and just revisiting that and understanding right now the city has a great relationship with the water utility district to provide that service, but the question becomes, are there others that might be able to provide that service at a lower cost? Some agencies actually look at contracting with local shops to do repairs of fleet vehicles, etc. And so that could be an option. The other one that we didn't have a determined fiscal impact for, just because the nature of those activities could go on for several years, but there's some items that are in the capital improvements plan that were funded through the parks levy that could be refocused and changed a little bit in terms of what the ongoing maintenance costs for those would be. And so, some cities have looked at doing that, where they've got this, expectation to change a park's capital improvement plan from something that's a very high level, high maintenance use, high activity use, like, playgrounds and very actively used soccer ball fields, those types of things, and shifting those into more kind of open space type of uses instead, and that ends up reducing the ongoing maintenance costs. So we don't have a price tag on that, but we raised it for discussion purposes for the future, especially as new parks might look at coming online, or new capital improvement projects that are coming on the pike. Then we shift over to revenue enhancements. So there's two categories of those. Ones are the ones that council has the authority to make themselves, and then the others which are voter approved. And so those range from implementing either expanding or implementing some new portions of the utility tax. In fact, just increasing the utility tax up to 6% and adding cable telecom type services could generate anywhere from 1 million to 2.6 million, depending on the amount and what you included in there. Some cities have looked at using photo traffic enforcement as a way to be able to help fund some of the safety initiatives that they need to implement in terms of roadway safety, road improvements, and other things. That has the opportunity of being able to generate about 1.7 million based on what's going on in a few other communities that are around there. And as we mentioned in the analysis, the city can't just decide to put those, and use those however it wants to, for whatever reasons. It's really got to be more in line in terms of school areas and dealing with that, as well as some of the red light issues. Rob, did you want to say something on that?
No, I'm just
okay. Didn't know if you were shifting. Sorry. Okay. Exercising the property tax levy, bank capacity is another option. That would, the city has about 400,000 of capacity still available. Implementing an admissions tax on all entertainment venues, could end up generating about $200,000 based on our analysis. Implementing a B&O tax. The city already has a B&O tax, but it's only levied on manufacturing type outfits, corporations, companies. And if it was extended more broadly, that has the potential, based on a per capita analysis with the other cities in the area, of generating some additional revenues. And then there's also the concept of development services fees, and doing a study on that and ensuring that the city is capturing its full cost recovery there. And so that's an option as well, had a little bit less of an impact. So those are all the items that council could move forward with just by resolution. The other three items would require voter approval, though. Doing a levy lid lift would require a majority approval. And a local sales tax of 0.2% to help backfill some of the city's costs there could end up, would require voter approval, as would the potential of creating a metropolitan park district, which really creates a separate taxing entity. And it would allow the city to shift costs related to park improvements and park programming to another separate district. And that district would have to implement a levy that would be able to take care of those costs. So that's something that requires voter approval to be able to create that district. Again, those three areas here, we're looking to maintain service levels to the fullest extent possible. Other strategies that would really reduce service levels, and we throw in number 18, which is take no action. It's not a viable option in the least, but we thought we would include that in our analysis to demonstrate and to discuss what the impacts are for an agency to not take action. The council has every intent of taking that action by virtue of allowing the creation of the Fiscal Sustainability Committee to get input from you and ultimately the city manager's recommendations. And so we incorporate that just more for discussion purposes. General fund service level and staffing reductions, we gave some examples in there about ways that the city could do that, that would, scale anywhere up to about the 1.8 million that would be required if no other options were exercised. But it's bleak in terms of what the impacts are to service delivery in the community. The city could stop funding its street pavement the transfers that it's making to the streets fund, but that would have a significant impact, as we indicated earlier. Just to maintain what you've got right now is expected to cost an additional 1.5 million. This would take another 600,000 out of it, making that gap more like 2.1 million in terms of maintaining. So there would be some pretty significant impacts in terms of road improvements. And then the two final areas, travel, meetings, and consulting contracts. There's potential for about an additional 50,000 on top of what staff has already implemented, as well as some of the recreation coordination activities could be in there as well. Total of all these, strategies, range from about 7 to 8.6 million. The goal is ultimately about 1.8 million. And so what we did is we took these strategies, and based on our understanding of the community and rating them in terms of feasibility, we went ahead and created 4 different scenario packages for the council to consider. The baseline is just a reminder of that we have a $1.8 million gap that has to be solved. Reserves would be depleted by 2024, and it assumes current staffing levels that would lead to those two. So scenario 1, we did this along a spectrum where we range from strong revenue enhancements to strong expenditure reductions and kind of a balance point in between. The first item is strong revenue enhancements, and that included, the first item is not a revenue enhancement, but there's, based on discussion with Rob and staff, there is a movement afoot perhaps to reduce and or eliminate that SRO program. And Rob, did you want to talk about that item?
Yeah, I've been in discussions with the school superintendent, and given what's going on with the discussions around policing and also with the pandemic, it's not a done deal, but it's kind of looking like the school district might cut its funding towards school resource officers and not have them, at least for next year, given that it's going to be online, and there's discussions on whether they would bring them back at all. Because it's kind of looking that way, we're thinking that it's kind of a likely scenario. Again, I'm using kind of and those types of words because the school district is still going through a process on whether to actually cut that program. But in my discussions, it's kind of pointing in that direction.
Understood. Good. The other options are all on the revenue side, exercising that property tax levy, the bank capacity. The $400,000 equate to 10% of the city's existing property taxes that it levies, roughly. And so doing it at one time would be a 10% increase in property taxes. And so we phase this in this scenario over a 3-year period. So it'd be about a 3% growth in any 1 year. And again, the council can do that by virtue of their, passing resolution ordinance to approve that. Utility tax is another area that the council has the authority to move forward in. In this case, it would implement utility tax of increase the one on gas and electric from 4 to 6%, implement a cable utility tax of 6%, and implement a solid waste utility tax of 6%. That would generate about $1 million a year starting in 2024. And then the final one is to implement fully the B&O tax that currently exists on all businesses, which would be about 0.2% of their gross receipts, and that would be implementing it by 2027. That would have about $500,000 impact there. Rob, did you want to mention something on this scenario?
Well, yeah, just on the B&O tax, so the city does have a B&O tax, like Steve said, but it's only on heavy manufacturing, and that at this point right now only affects 2 businesses in the city. So we have about 1,000 businesses in the city, and the B&O tax, as it currently is applied and adopted by the council, only affects 2 businesses. So Steve, you're saying that it would be across the board B&O tax starting in 2027.
Correct. Right. The second scenario is, again, also has some strong revenue focus, but this one would potentially provide opportunities for to focus on road and safety improvements. So the SRO position, we already mentioned that. Property tax levy is in this one as well, starting in 2022 over 3 years. This one adds the photo traffic enforcement solution, which would create fines that the city could use to help take care of road improvements, safety improvements around schools, in major intersections, areas where there's a great concern. That could end up, like I said, generating about 1.7 million. If it was phased in starting in fiscal 22 over 2 years, would provide significant relief. And in fact, the combination of these three that we're looking at here would provide additional capacity of about $4.5 million to fund roads by 2027. So it's helpful in terms of that $1.5 million gap that already exists, with the understanding that, let's face it, probably in the areas where photo traffic enforcement would be installed would likely be the areas where there's a significant investment in road infrastructure in the future. And so so that's a way for the city to be able to take care of some of those costs that it currently has in providing those services. Let me jump to scenario 3, which is a more balanced scenario. I'm also looking at the time here, Jim, trying to finish up here. The balanced approach would still have the SRO in it. In fact, all 4 of them have that SRO as an option. Scenario 3 takes more of a balanced approach, looking at some changes with expenditures, and then on the revenue side as well. The travel, training, and consulting services would be reduced by that $50,000 in 2021. Recreation coordination activities would be reduced there as well. Using the bank capacity as a revenue source, looking at user fees for development services in 2022. This would also then introduce that city organizational structure change and the utility tax, and the blending of all of those different solutions would end up providing fiscal sustainability. And then the fourth area is really focusing more on the expenditure side. And in fact, when in looking at all of these items that we've already mentioned, including looking at the cost allocation plan, shifting the cost of ball field and park use to the users that are using those, the change in the way that the maintenance of the 2 parks here would be handled, organizational structure change. We still have the levy bank capacity, because frankly the rest of these would not have equated to the significance that is needed for the $1.8 million. So we've incorporated that. And then also this eliminates the transfer, the planned transfer of about $600,000 per year to the streets fund. So that would have a serious impact on roadways. So each of these scenarios create the sustainability. I've got separate graphs that really demonstrate this, and I'm just going to motor through them very quickly to show you and really focus more on the bottom line here in terms of what's happening with reserves. Reserves are falling below the reserve goal of 2 months of annual operating expenditures, but would ultimately be at or exceed that goal in those future years for that first scenario. As I mentioned, the second scenario would grow reserves sufficient that some excess reserves could be transferred to fund road improvements, and that could be programmed into this and future years. Scenario 3 again would also balance this and keep reserves at that reserve target, with a momentary dip in 2025, but would still be well within shot of being able to recover that in 2026. And then finally, on the expenditure reduction side, given the phasing and timing of all of these different strategies, of which 2 of them are revenue enhancements, would again keep reserves at where it needed to be. From management partners' perspective, based on the services that the city is currently being provided, and the level of services that the community has grown to come and love and expect, and also influenced by what we're seeing and how the city, looks at itself compared to other agencies in the area, your revenues are below what other cities are currently gathering on a per capita basis. Now, yeah, if you had a Walmart or a Costco that was in town, okay, that could take care of that, right? But let's face it, that possibility is probably few and far between. And so given that, we think that, and also, especially given the fact that there's this divergence between your largest revenue source, property tax, which only can grow at 1% without, voter approval to go more than that, other than using bank capacity that you've had from years where the council made decision to not exercise that 1% increase. So given that, as well as the divergence of your costs of providing service, whether city did it or whether you contracted to have those services provided, those are still going to grow and likely grow greater than 1%. And as a result of that, we think that creating some revenues that would be able to help keep pace with that inflation would be important for the city to look at. And that's where scenarios 1 and 2 come into play. Of course, there's issues with each one of those. Who does it place the burden on? How are those implemented? And so those are things that are going to have to be considered ultimately by the council, right? But we believe that these two scenarios address that long-term fiscal gap, have a greater opportunity of giving you long-term fiscal sustainability, not just to correct a problem that you've got over the next 3, 4, or 5 years. It increases your per capita revenues to be on par. And then, also, like I said, your road funding is already insufficient based on existing standards. And as you start looking at scenario 3 or definitely scenario 4, that's going to have an even more exacerbated impact there. So that was where our recommendations were. That concludes my presentation. Finally, I know there was a lot to go into. I'm going to turn it back over to Rob and Jim for thoughts and then also answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Steve. Good work. Can you go back a couple slides? Just maybe go to scenario 1. Yeah, right. Let's see. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so does everybody see the bottom slide that shows our general fund reserves, and see how it dips down to 2.4 million. So one thing you need to keep in mind is this is not our only pot of reserves. We also have a strategic opportunities fund that's really an extension of the general fund. It was created and supplied by the general fund, and the strategic opportunities fund, oh man, I'm a couple months old now in this, but I believe we're close to $3 million in the Strategic Opportunities Fund. Joanne, to put you on the spot. I should know this. 2.5, 3 million, I believe, in the Strategic Opportunities Fund. So that's not.
Yes.
Yeah. Is it closer to 3 or closer to 2.5?
It's projected to be closer to 3 by the end of the year.
Okay, but anyway, so that's that strategic opportunities money used to be in the general fund, but we set it aside as a separate pot. But it is accessible and usable, and there are no restrictions on it. If the council wanted to transfer that money back into the general fund, they could. So, and then also we have. Not to be confusing, but we also have another fund with the word strategic in it. It's called Strategic Reserves. So there's Strategic Opportunities Fund, which is close to 3 million. And then we have a Strategic Reserve Fund, which is really more like a strict rainy day fund. So when the economy gets really bad and you really need to dip into it on an emergency basis, that's what the Strategic Reserve Fund is. And Joanne, what does that fund have in it?
Strategic Reserve has about 1.5.
Yeah. So just to keep in mind, those are 2 additional pots of money. But like Steve said, they're one time in nature. They're just money sitting there in a bank account. They don't have a flow of revenue to keep them supplied.
And if I may jump back to this other slide, which showed, before we do anything, right, before any fixes are made, the use of the completely wiping out the Strategic Opportunities Fund could keep your reserves at 0 by 2027. But again, it doesn't do anything with respect to dealing with the structural gap. The structural gap is really what's got to be addressed here. And the one-time monies might help in terms of delaying decisions, but it doesn't have the impact of being able to eliminate any decisions that need to, correct the structural deficiency that that you have when you compare revenue.
Yeah. So the Strategic Opportunities Fund could buy you some time, but it doesn't solve the problem.
That's correct. That's right. Is there anything else you want me to show, Rob?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay. I'm going to stop share for conversation, but then I can always go back to it if you need me to bring it up. So.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, very much. So it just occurred to me one thing. I want to ask if the task force members have any questions of Rob. Of Steve, I'm sorry. But then I wonder, before you start stating any preferences, I wonder if we should invite Vernella to talk a little bit about the social inequity tool and how that might be used. But so let's start with, and again, I'm looking at, it's like 817. So does anybody have any questions of the information Rob has presented? As opposed to your opinions or reactions. Lynn, go ahead, thanks.
Yeah, quick question. Some of these involve a fair amount of ongoing cost to implement. Was that factored into the scenario?
Cost to implement, is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for example, like the utility tax is already existing program, so that wouldn't necessarily be something new. The B&O tax is something that's a little bit more, significant when it comes to dealing with that. We've incorporated some needing for capacity in there. We haven't envisioned the need for 2 or 3 new staff to deal with that. I know that there are some agencies, right next door that have implemented an extensive B&O tax program and had to increase staffing. So, but were there other examples, Lynn, that you had that you were thinking?
Yeah, that was one. And then like spinning up a whole new utility with stormwater, I think that would be pretty costly in the long run.
Yeah. Hey, Rob, did you want to? You had your hand up, I think.
So with stormwater, we already have the utility established. The tax would be just collected by the county, so it wouldn't be an additional cost to. But let me point out something though. When it comes to utility tax is seen as a regressive tax because it takes a greater portion of low income, household income, especially if you're low income. And so there's cities around here, maybe Kirkland, I know Bothell, where they have a utility tax, but they also give a rebate to folks who are low income. And that would require a portion of an employee to administer that rebate or that discount. We don't have to give the discount, but knowing my city council, I bet they would want to give a discount for low income.
And if I could say my experience with other communities that have done that, they have leveraged any of the existing low income provisions that already exist with, like, let's say gas and electric. So you can leverage that and, by using the gross receipts that come from those already reduced costs, it ends up reducing, that utility tax. So that's one way that some agencies have found to implement those types of programs by leveraging the existing work that's already done by some of those utilities. But that's not true for all utilities. So.
Yeah.
The cable doesn't do that at all.
And then on B&O tax and admissions tax, we would have to collect that. We wouldn't be able to rely on the state. And I know Shoreline recently implemented a B&O tax last year, and I believe they hired a new position. I can't remember if it's part-time or full-time, but they did have to hire someone to help them administer the B&O tax. They're a lot bigger than we are, so they have a lot more work to do in collecting that tax, but still.
Just the same question on the photo enforcement. Does that come with any costs, or is that a net?
Yeah, that's a net number that's in there. Okay. 7 is net of the cost. It's typically one that, you know, you have a contract for maintenance of those cameras and the initial cost of those that are on a lease basis, or, yeah.
Got it.
So what about the cost of the hearings, and if municipal court is required, what about the costs of actually carrying out and assessing the fines? Would that be handled by current staff at the city or additional staff?
The fines usually happen by the contract that you end up working with a third-party, you know, vendor that handles all that administration, and those costs that are incorporated in that $1.7 million net amount. I think I'm looking at it right now. Let's see. Forgive me. Oh, here it is. Let's see. Yeah, we were expecting, you know, the fines that could be generated by each camera is about, well, it's about $1 million per camera. And if we assume that 3 cameras would be installed, it would be, let me see here, hang on. So the total for 3 cameras would be about $3 million with enforcement costs of $1.3 million. So the net savings is about $1.7 million.
Great. And
Yeah.
Regarding the $200,000 admissions tax, how would that be assessed, and how is the $200,000 arrived at?
Yep. So we did an analysis of looking at the different entertainment venues that exist in Kenmore. Clearly, the golf course is one of them. So is the bowling alley, and there's some other potential smaller ones. And so we did some revenue estimation. We had some good information on the golf course side, and we did some estimation in terms of what the bowling alley could end up generating, and just based it on those two. And so a tax rate of 5% would generate about $200,000 a year.
Mm-hmm. And Fernell, I think I saw that you had a question, or you had raised your hand.
Question. If I missed it, I didn't hear about internet infrastructure. Is that part of any of the plan? Have you talked or addressed that? Being able to get access to everyone? Did I freeze?
No. No, just trying to understand, Fernell, what your perspective is on that. Is that providing internet infrastructure to the community?
Was there cost in? Yes. Was it involved? I'm sorry, getting kind of tired. Was there accountability taken into needing to upgrade that in any way? Was anybody addressing that issue at all, or did that come up?
Rob, do you want to address that? Because that's really not something that we looked at in terms of a fiscal sustainability analysis. That would require more investment within the community, and whether it's done typically through private enterprise or by or a city investing in something like that. You know, and we've seen a lot of situations. Let me just make one more point. We've seen a lot of situations where cities have gone forward with trying to do investment of internet infrastructure in the community, make it available and reach everybody. Typically, those have a cost more than they do pay for themselves. So
we haven't looked at what that would do in Kenmore at all then. So
no. But one thing that reminds me of is there's also other new programs that are kind of in demand. The council is wanting us to do a climate action plan, and that would require resources. That's not in Steve's analysis. Another thing on my wish list is a part-time human resources manager. Joanne is spread very thin, as she, usually, you hear somebody doubling as something. Well, she quintuples as somebody. She's our finance director, our HR manager, our IT director, our risk manager, and supervises the city clerk and the human services. So that's like 6 things and more. And so I worry about that. I'm worrying about burning Joanne out. I've been worried about that for many years now. And personnel law and regulations change so frequently. and it's such an important, even high-risk area and time-consuming job that I would love to have a part-time human resources manager. Now, is that in the equation? Steve, I think you did have that in the organizational changes, right? You're muted.
Of course I am. Yeah, that was part of the organizational structure change we had analyzed, that look at it doing some shifting of different resources within the city that would ultimately save money. But as a result of putting some of those existing functions that would be handled by one position in the city infrastructure, by eliminating that position, it would shift over to Joanne. Joanne's going to definitely need more support, and so we incorporated that in that organizational structure recommendation.
Yeah, but I have a long list of wish list items I'd love to see to run a better city. I'd love to invest more in IT. We have a very thin budget when it comes to IT. We have a consultant that visits us on Fridays, and that's fine. We're a small organization, but I think I'd love to see more invested in IT. Geographic information systems, we could invest a lot more in that and provide even better services and more responsive information to our public. List goes on. I'm not saying I'm going to recommend all those new things, but Fernell reminded me of all the wonderful things I'd like to add to the budget.
Gotta fix the current problem. Yeah.
So it's 8:27. Do any of you on the task force have other questions you want to ask of Steve, just for clarification, the kinds of questions you've been asking now? My next question is, could you hold on and give us, say, 5 to 10 more minutes? What I'd like to do is ask Fernell just to quickly walk us through the 2-page tool that the city's or the school district has used, and talk a little bit about how that could be applied. That would be something for you to think about between now and our next meeting. But I also wondered that before we leave tonight, if the 5 of you on the task force just want to give any of your give us the heads up of where are you thinking right now in terms of where we're going? Like Steve has presented really clearly 4 scenarios. Maybe you want to comment on those, or just kind of even your own kind of early preliminary opinions. And I'd like to see us do that before we leave tonight. So I guess I'm asking for about 10 more minutes. So, okay, Fernell, can you just walk us through this tool? Everybody has it?
Instead of reading through it, I'll give it to you how it lands on me. First, thank you for Joanna and Steve for the tools. Those are options of ways the public can participate. The reason I was talking about the tool is because it's the way that we make room for each other and push each other out, and it's that give and go. And so when we know the dynamic or makeup of who's at the table and who might be missing, what we haven't thought of, that's why I was asking about the internet. That's great to have a tool to use that way, but if you don't have the access to use it, then we're just asking the same, folks, or the ones who can have access. So are we making sure to use all of our venues to be able to access that information for each other? I was a little disappointed about the simplicity of the balance tool, because it's a little assumption about we don't have enough qualifying or education to know how to come about things. Just like Lou mentioned, well, gosh, does the public even know how to talk finance? And that's the validity of that also balances on the other side of the way that the budget lands on people. It's valid of how you experience those decisions. So just because that the way you maybe intellectualize it, or the language you use, or the tools you use, doesn't mean people don't understand, because they have to live it. They have to live with those decisions. And so that lived experience is what I was trying to go at, like an example when you were talking about the street road improvements. Some of that trauma I bring is the students who've died and passed away because of those street and road impairments that they've lost their lives over. And so in that equity tool, or that the tool and the balance tool, I'd want to be able to weigh in on that and share this. I want safety in my community, but I didn't, it doesn't show that in just the balance tool. It doesn't show that in just Steve's report. So all of those things are needed, plus the experience of the people who are actually it lands on and how they're living it. All three of those are important to Umbrella. And that's basically what the equity tool is about, is let's balance those ways that we experience it, the way we understand and talk about it, plus the tools that we have to use input about that to make decisions for us to be able to include each other and live in the way that we all want to live and experience the necessary needs and programs. And like you said, the way the public expects to be served. And so if we're just relying on one or the other, or heavily this or that, we're not capturing it. And so I appreciate all the different ways. And I agree with John at the beginning. Gosh, I'm not, walking in with experience or, knowledge from what you guys have been working on for 2 years, but I sure can tell you how it's felt living it for all this time too. So that's that lived experience to balance that out. And the language too is important. We've got so many languages just in our community, and how we're expressing things and talking about it, the terms we use, how we even experience how we use our money, or how we use our resources, how we use our time. So I just liked Shorelines because it was such a clear, quick picture of let's take all that into account. And so that's why I wanted to just, introduce and see what lens everybody brought through. I wasn't, on the attack of anything. I'm just trying to make sure that all parts of the picture are experienced and part of it. So I appreciate getting to hear all those pieces. And so.
Would you suggest, it strikes me that this is somewhat of an empathy tool. So do you suggest, like, as task force members are thinking in the next 2 weeks in our break before our next meeting, even to look at this and think in terms like, well, how does this affect other people? Put yourself in the shoes of others, and don't forget about the different diverse communities and constituencies.
Well, because it's impossible to go and know how somebody else's shoes feel, but what that's saying is understand your shoes. If you've walked around with, I've walked around with a lot of privilege because of the resource and the contract I've had with the school district so long, and so I need to look at that. Well, gosh, I'm not getting pushed out of my rental agreement or home in the next month because of the pandemic, and so I have some level of security there. But then I'm also remembering there's families that I know that have not been communicated and have access to school or information, and are being removed from their home, and so what are the decisions that I'm making today gonna affect? How are the decisions gonna help support them instead of push them out or make it land heavier on them? Because those of us in the margins, we figure this out. We do this all the time, and so it's beneficial to us to find those answers and lean to those people who are in the most need, because they can help us the most. We should take their lead. So as you're at home and learning about yourself and what that might look like, reach out to those community members or neighbors that you have and talk with them about it. Gosh, did you know that there's a tool? Did you know we're going to run out of money in a couple of years? What do you think about that? What's ways we can generate? I mean, when I do this with, students, they're brilliant. They can think, they've got all kinds of things for the future that we haven't even thought of yet. We need to bring youth into this equation. They can, oh my gosh, I can already just see the answers coming from them right here. So that's how I'm going to use my tool, is like, oh gosh, I got to get this back to my students and see what they have to generate, what I haven't thought of and everything, and bring back to the table. And just, so reach out to who you bump up against, and reach a little further to say, gosh, are we really getting to our community? Our bubble gets kind of small. And so I'm just asking you to stretch it and use the tool to do it.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask the task force members, do you have any questions for Nell about the use of this tool?
You all should have a copy of it, and it's also in the packet for the public to see too. The Kenmore City Council wants us to create and implement a diversity, equity, and inclusiveness policy, or what I call DEI policy for short. Actually, our intern Adam Nevenzel, who's listening, taught me that term, DEI. But anyway, we're going to be working on doing a DEI policy that will have a tool similar to that. But in the meantime, while we're working on getting one, I'm recommending that we refer to the Shoreline school districts that Fernell has pointed me to.
And Karina, when we served on the DEI committee of our school district, we developed one as well. There's many, City of Seattle has one. There's the equity tool, a set of questions, a lens to check things through. And so I don't know, I've just seen a lot. So, and built a lot being a DEI consultant as well. So I just love the framework, that it's so clear and gets to the point quickly and doesn't have a lot of language that you don't understand. I just like things clear and plain. So that's where I brought that one. So thanks.
Good. And again, I appreciate the fact that you're all being patient as we go over time, but let's make this real quick. I don't expect anybody to start getting into a lot of the details, but I thought it would be really helpful as we think about, we're taking now 2 weeks. We'll have 2 more meetings, maybe just 1, but possibly 2. Where are you right now, the 5 of you? What are you leaning toward when you think about kind of broadly maybe think about the scenarios the way Steve proposed them, or in some other way you might want to characterize it? Are you looking at a balance of different strategies or leaning toward one set or another? Jeff?
Yeah, I read through the document pretty extensively, and it was well done. Thanks for the work on this. I think overall I agree with the sentiment that our focus should be on some of these larger revenue areas, given where we are revenue per capita. And I think as someone, my perspective is someone who has lived in I moved from the Bay Area where housing was ridiculous to Seattle, where housing is not quite as ridiculous, but still ridiculous. And my family has struggled to get into a position of financial stability, even with the privileges that I've been granted with stable employment and things like that. And but even given my situation, and I understand that I have a specific perspective, I feel like there is capacity to pay more taxes, higher property tax, and some of these other taxes that we're talking about. I am concerned about the regressive nature of most of the taxes that are available to us as a city. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of options at the scale that we need. And so like the utility tax and even the photo enforcement, traffic enforcement, that's regressive too. You often get the people who are getting those tickets, who are getting those fees, are often people who are not in a position to really pay them. So I think the community has more capacity as a whole to pay more taxes. I am concerned about the regressive nature of the taxes. But given the inflexible position that we have, I'm also probably in support of I think that I would probably be supportive of these measures in strategy 1 and 2, just given the position that we're in. And then the other thing that I would say is I also wish that we could be a little bit more. I feel like a lot of these things are a lot of the proposals are made in the current paradigm, which is where we are, and we have to make decisions in the current paradigm. But I also would like to, I participated in some discussion around the policing that Kenmore had, and I appreciated that there was an opportunity to give feedback, but there was this kind of understanding that, you know, we live in a world where policing costs this much, and we have to have this many cops on duty, and we have to, you know, those kinds of things. And there wasn't a lot of appetite to really say, well, what would a completely different thing look like? And I, again, as Kenmore, we are a small community and we're under certain pressures. You know, we contract with King County Sheriff, and I understand that there's those pressures. I both understand the pressure and the bind that we are in many of these cases, but I also wish that we could step out of that box and change the paradigm in a way that we could really look at, say, what does a completely different policing force look like, where we could reduce the budget by $2 million over the biennium, or you know, and you know, just like I was looking at the and this will be my last comment, and I'll let other people go. But just looking at the police services line on the Balancing Act, you know, it's talking about mental health resources. Should the city invest more in programs such as Radar program? And it's saying, you know, it would be $100,000 for navigator services, and then additional $20,000 to the police for more police time. And that just seems counterintuitive to me, that we would be adding mental health services to supplement the public safety need in regards to mental health services, but then we would have to add, it wouldn't be kind of a trade to say police, you know. So I feel like some of these decisions were given a false choice of we're not actually looking at what all of the creative opportunities we have. But then again, I always come back to, I understand the restrictions that the community is under too. So it's a difficult decision. Those are my reactions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Lou, Elizabeth, Lynn, for now.
Yes, I like scenario 1, and I still think there's room for property tax increases, as we've discussed in previous meetings. Having the city council review their decisions on moratoriums on some of the mobile home parks to allow them to be sold and developed to a higher and better use, which would definitely increase the revenue base that Rob has agreed would definitely improve some increase in our property tax revenue. So I haven't seen that addressed as part of the recommendation of the city council. Not that I expect the city council to even agree with anything that we're going to be recommending regardless, just like they seem to be ignoring a lot of the planning commission recommendations as well. But that would be my feeling, is certainly scenario 1. I'm not certainly not in favor of revenue being derived from traffic photo enforcement.
Can I tag on to Lou's comment? Lou, you had asked what the property tax base increase would be if the mobile home parks were allowed to just develop to a higher and better use. And I believe we provided that analysis to you. Okay. Right. We usually, what we give to one task force member, we try to give to all. I don't remember, did we give it to, obviously we didn't give it to Fernell, but did you all recall getting that? You don't recall getting that?
I don't think so.
No.
I'll make a note to make sure you guys get that analysis that we did, that Lou requested.
I'll make a note of that too.
Well, I can go next.
Hey, Lynn, thank you.
I am very much in favor of a balanced approach. Ultimately, I think in the long run, you have to really mind expenses and mind revenue, not really one or the other. Having said that, I think I would have a completely different scenario of a balanced approach than what's recommended. I would really want to pay strong attention to who's being impacted by the revenue sources, and any way possible shift to some of the user fees. So those who use the services pay for the services. We know utility taxes can have a disproportionate impact on segments of our population, and that can be very difficult. So I would try and look at revenue sources where people use the services as much as possible. And then again, paying attention to some of the expenses and looking at some of those long-term savings. I don't think the reorg is one I would favor, though. I think there's a couple other that you have in there that are pretty feasible. And I guess the last thing I would say is we're just an advisory board. You know, we can't make decisions. But I think, you know, the council did ask for us to exist so that they could hear a measure of what the public thinks. And I guess one thing I would say is please consider not putting new initiatives on top right now, like a sustainability master plan, those types of things. Could we maybe wait just a little bit? This is a long-term game, and right now we're in the hole. And so adding new stuff right now might not be the best time. We just have to bide our time. And I guess one last thing is we do need to use some reserves. This is the rainy day. And I know that these scenarios do take that into consideration.
Thank you very much, Helen. And
I don't really have a lot to add. I think Jeff and Lynn kind of explained a lot of it, but I too want a balanced approach. I do like strategies 1 and 2, a combination of the revenue and, you know, adjusting some services. I don't trying to make it equitable, I think is the hardest thing that we have to figure out. So yeah, and I'm not sure how I feel about the traffic camera. The one in Lake Forest Park has gotten me once, so but seeing that big number, it gives you a little perspective on paper, right, of what that could potentially look like for the city. But people have strong feelings about them. And I also think just in terms of getting the community involved, doing whatever we can as a task force to invite people to participate in our government. I think that's something that's been really eye-opening for me, is that I thought I understood how city government worked, but this process has enhanced that, and I've learned a lot through all of it. So I hope that our other citizens of the city will participate and take part in the Balancing Act tool.
Cool. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Fernell?
Oh, I just was quickly gonna tag on to what Jeff said about getting to the root of the issue. And again, that balanced approach. And when we dig deep into that, you know, the root of what is the issue, that helps us bring that all into perspective. Just like I'm thinking of this, I don't know the city in Oregon, but how they pull their resources of fire safety, mental health, police, to be able to respond to people as a service, as a team, and how that helped pull resources and get to the root. And again, just to remind, communities with resources don't have high issues of crime and all, because when people are served, we're in community together. It's when it's out of balance when we have more high incidences and issues. And so just keeping at the root of, well, what is why the spending, why is that costing a lot? Why are we needing more of that? Why do we do that? Well, what's the root? So if we keep a focus on that, and so Jeff, you did it all right, just looking at the tool of let's look at the issue, the problem, the root of it, and not just slap it on really quick, because it's a long game. So, and
By the way, that city in Oregon you were talking about,
Yeah.
that's Eugene, and that's
Oh,
where I live. That's
oh,
not,
so of course,
it's the
there's
Cahoots
balancing
program,
it
yeah.
of course. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being willing to stay longer than our agenda called for. I really appreciate this last 10 minutes or so. Did somebody else, Rod, do you have your hand up? I'm sorry.
Just one last thing. At the beginning of the meeting, John Hendrickson mentioned the incorporation feasibility study. I think that is an interesting document, and it would be a good reference point. I think it was produced in the late 90s, so it's good 20 plus years old, but yeah, we'll send it out to you. I think you should take a look at it and see how things have evolved since then. So
was that the same document that he provided at our first meeting?
I think he provided parts of it to you, but I can get you the whole thing.
Okay. Yeah, because I think I read through that.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Are any of you available for email or question or catch up, or would be willing to help me understand some things to catch up if I had a question? Is there someone I could email, or anybody who would be willing to do that? Yeah? Okay. I just want to, I don't know what if you're outside of this or what protocol is, but just if I had a question, I just want to know if I could pop you a question. Sure. Thanks.
And I think you would all have each other's emails, given the fact that the things I've sent you recently have been to all of you. So, but if you need my help just in giving email addresses, I can help you there. So I thought that was directed toward your fellow colleagues on the task force.
Yeah. So. You too.
Well, anybody can call me anytime if you have any questions, or
right.
Joanne.
Can I call you too?
Okay, well, thank you all very much. Again, I really thought these last 10 minutes were very, very worthwhile. I appreciate your comments. And then just to remind you real quickly, we're having a meeting on Monday night, August 24th. You're all holding on your calendar the 25th in case we need that. It might make for a longer evening for you, the 24th, but there is that community listening session first for about 90 minutes before your meeting, and you might want to drop into that as a way to listen to your fellow residents or citizens. So. But I'll send you some more reminders of all of that too. So, and since we've talked about this tonight, go tell your neighbors or share the Balancing Act tool with different people too, so that we can spread the word even through the power of your voices.
I already did.
So,
yeah, hey, Jeff, put that on Nextdoor, man. I mean, you were talking about it. Do it.
I will.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Good night.